This is the Super League Timeout Podcast. With your hosts, Michael Hansen-Morris and Jess Smith.
Welcome back to the Super League Timeout Podcast after a weekend full of games in the dynamic men's and Mari Women's Super League. 11 games in total. And as always, it's myself, Mike Hansen-Morris, and Jess Smith here to break it down. And Jess, before we go into the games, we expected chaos, and I think we got it over the weekend.
Yeah, plenty of chaos, plenty of sets of volleyball, some fun things to happen, some bloopers to happen. So yeah, plenty of exciting points to talk about.
And we will start in the dynamic men's Super League. And we'll start with the action on Saturday as Mallory had a quick 3-0 victory over Leeds. Scores 25-21, 25-18, 25-22. And yes, probably the expected result, but as much as I say it was quick, Leeds made Mallory work for it.
Yeah, I mean, getting into the early 20s is quite impressive against such a strong Mallory team. So while they didn't take home any points this weekend, they will surely take some heart from that performance. And they'll be looking to take that to the next stage. And we'll talk about what they did on Sunday as well in just a few moments' time. But definite strengths there within that Leeds team.
Yeah, and then we had the rematch of the opening weekend game up in Nottingham. Nottingham having beaten London Giants 3-1 on that opening weekend. Well, it was the London Giants' turn to reverse that. Having dropped the first set 25-20, Giants went on to be convincing in sets 2, 3, and 4. 22-25, 17-25, and then the fourth set 12-25. So Giants getting revenge, Jess, and they did it in ever so convincing fashion.
Yeah, they'll be pleased with that result after opening weekend. We talked a couple of times about how they didn't look like a team at opening weekend, whereas Nottingham did. And I think this time, and I'm not sure exactly what it was that went wrong for Nottingham in sets 3 and 4, set 4 particularly, but it just really turned itself on its head.
Yeah, a couple of big stat lines in the game. In the end, Giants hit 367 as a team and passed just over a 2-4, which against the Nottingham serving attack is no mean feat. But it was really the middle, Hamza Urachi, taking the way. He somehow didn't get team MVP. I'd like to throw a challenge flag on that one. Hamza ended up with 16 kills, no errors on 23 swings. And he's definitely developing into one to watch for that Giants team. Just it's back-to-back weeks. He's had huge games.
Yeah, and he was great even in opening weekend. He didn't get as many sets as you would like your middles to get, but we saw some strength from him then. So to see him come into the fore now and see them relying a bit more on him through that middle is exactly what we want to see as these teams develop and come together a bit more.
Yeah, it was Kanai Akana with a big game for Nottingham, 17 kills on 38 swings for the opposite. And then we'll move on to the Super League live game on Saturday. I was there for Essex men beating Durham Palatinate 3-1 in the end. Durham winning set 1, 25-21. But then Essex Rebels coming back and getting the first home victory for now head coach Ewan Fraser, 25-16, 25-21, 25-18, and led by Tom Shudderman. 21 kills, 7 errors on 40 swings for a 350 hitting percentage. Jess, and that was a big win for Essex just to bounce back from that London Giants defeat 7 days earlier.
Yeah, I mean, it's always a bit of a challenge when you've got a change in coaching, especially when it comes quite abruptly. And as well, we talked about having a player coach with Ewan Fraser, and that's difficult for him as well as coach and captain. But really great to see that in that home venue, they turned it back up a notch, went back to playing in the style that we tend to see them play in, and great to see Shatterman have an excellent weekend as well.
Yeah, Ben Montspler ended up with 18 kills, a lot of them in set 1, and Essex did a really good job from there, keeping him quiet. And Sean McQuiggan had a big serving game, 5 aces, and ended up with 9 kills as well. But it wasn't enough for Durham, who then had a very, very quick turnaround. They headed to Ernest Bevan on Sunday morning, 9:45 for that one. but it didn't take long for Mallory to get going. It was 25-18 in set one. Durham came back and won set two, 23-25, but Mallory ended up pulling out 25-15, 25-22. 3-1 victory, just matching the score from Essex. And a big day for Mallory, hit over 300 in the end. A couple of major bloopers, including a Nathan Fullerton net touch that was most definitely a net touch. That one has already been out on socials through Mallory, them having a bit of fun. But Jess, important for Mallory as well, just to be solid, because that second set, there's a lot of wobbles, a lot of errors from Mallory, but they found a way to kind of grind through. But credit for Durham, because it was a really difficult back-to-back for them.
Yeah, difficult to play back-to-back matches, especially when your second one is so early in the morning. You've got limited recovery time. But, from the Mallory side, we saw last season sometimes they struggled if they fell in a set to pick themselves back up and have that resilience. To see them putting that in this season and to bounce back quite quickly and to come back from a one set defeat to winning 25-15 in the next set is quite impressive. So from a mental standpoint, it bodes quite well for them. And obviously they had a great weekend overall, so that was their second win, the only doubleheader team to have 2 wins at the weekend.
Yeah, on the men's side, definitely. We'll talk about the Mari Women's Super League as someone pulled off, or a couple of teams pulled off back-to-back wins. And then I suppose the last game of the weekend, I was going to say it's a nightcap, but this was definitely like a 1 o'clock first serve. Leeds completing their doubleheader weekend at Richmond and getting a point on the board, Jess. Congratulations to Leeds. Maybe wanted a little bit more from this, though, having won the first set in Richmond 17-25. Richmond came back 25-17, 25-20 in the middle two sets. And then Leeds won a thrilling fourth set, 27-29, before Richmond edged out the tiebreaker 15-12. And these two sides, a lot of times, seemed really evenly matched. There was not a lot in this game. In the end, the experience of Richmond just about came through.
Yeah, and we talked about the youth of the Leeds squads, both the men's and the women's teams, but to see them fighting back so hard, 29-27 fourth set, that's some tough going, and it takes a lot of, physical and mental toughness. They might be disappointed that they lost in the fifth, but once you get to a fifth set, there's only 15 points. It can 1 or 2 points one way or the other, a couple of unlucky things that happen can really swing things, but I'm sure that they will be super pleased to have taken away their first point of the season.
Yeah, and both teams passed really well in this fixture. Leeds a 2-2-5, Richmond a 2-3-8. And Leeds did a really good job of keeping Artemi Suldakov quiet, at least by his standards. Ended up with just 13 kills on 26 swings in the end, as Richmond finally got a little bit of balance. 11 kills for Abdi Malik Shakuri, who was great in the fourth set defensively as well. Ivo Dobrin, 9 kills, one massive block. But Richmond couldn't really snow down Nelson Moranga. 29 kills on 53 swings for Nelson. We think he may be gone for a couple of upcoming games. We're not 100% sure, but he may be heading back home for a couple of weeks. So, Jess, it's going to be a big void to fill for Leeds going forward to play Mallory this weekend. But the fact that they got performances from other people, they've got that passing unit in and really solid now, that's going to be giving them some encouragement that they can do some damage in the Super League.
Oh yeah, definitely. And if they can keep the passing solid, it gives them an opportunity with Marengwa away to say, right, we don't have our outlet hitter right now, so what else can we try? Where can we be creative? Where can we, get some of our, maybe get the middles involved, try something a little bit different and just see how it plays out, because, playing against Mallory, they're top of the table right now. What do they have to lose? They've got 1 point on the board. They can try and take another point. They can try and put in a good performance, or they can just focus on, learning as much as they can on this week.
Yeah, and the one thing they'll want to tidy up, both teams will want to tidy up, is the error count. Richmond with 64 across the 5 sets, but Leeds ended up with 72. A lot of them, we know Pete McCaskill wants to be aggressive on serve, but 72 errors is going to always make it difficult. So a little area for Leeds to tidy up. But as we said, point on the board, and that'll have some encouragement. Over on to the Mari Women's Super League. And the early game on Saturday was Mallory versus Leeds. And as we expected, Mallory fairly convincingly over Leeds, 3-0, 25-9, 25-11, 25-13. And Jess, Mallory's experience really showing through. Every player in the squad getting on court, everyone contributing for Mallory as Leeds really struggled to find any rhythm.
Yeah, I mean, Mallory have been in really good form recently. They've got a lot of really experienced players. Obviously, we know that Leeds have quite a lot of younger players on the court that are still learning and still trying to, feel things out in the Super League, playing against players that have had experience not only in the UK but in other nations. So it's a great learning experience for Leeds. You can see, that they went from 9 to 11 to 13 points. So some positives there. They got better rather than getting more pressured. But Mallory, of course, is going to be pleased with the fact that they kept things, in a relatively low points percentage for the Leeds women.
Yeah, Chloe Allen, 9 kills, no errors on 16 swings for 563, and a Leah Raffa off the bench in set number 3, 5 kills on 9 swings. A couple of those highlights for Mallory. So next up, a trip up to the Midlands as Team Side Out started their road doubleheader, and they were made to work for it up in Derby. 4 sets in the end, and all 4 sets decided by 4 points or less. Both sides winning a set apiece early on, 23-25. Side Out the first, Dark Star the second, but then Side Out winning set 3 and set 4 to claim that 3 points in the league standings, 21-25, 22-25. And yes, super tight, but maybe a missed opportunity for Dark Star with a slightly weakened Side Out side traveling up north.
Yeah, Polonia will be pleased to take away the win and to have all 3 points out of this match. I'm sure of it. But the fact that these teams are so close in their performances is really interesting to see, how is this going to play out for the rest of the season? And again, does this kind of point to Dark Star's lack of depth on the bench, causing problems for them because they have limited changes they can make? And then, of course, Polonia not having all of their players, that obviously has had an impact on them. So, plus it's a double header weekend, so they've got a lot of things to think about rather than just focusing on one single match. So, it's an interesting one. I'm trying not to read too much into it, but it's tough not to start to think about how close it really was.
Yeah, and it was the Side Out middles that had a big impact on this game. Casey Bellon stepping in for, I believe, her Super League debut, especially this season. Cambridge Van der Ver combining for 12 kills, 1 error on 25 swings, and they were a big factor. Alice Brown leading the way for Darkstar with 13 kills on 40 swings. And then our Super League live game on Saturday afternoon at the Essex Sport Arena went to the way of the Durham Platinums, avenging that Bucks final loss last season. Durham taking the first 2 sets, 22-25, 18-25, and that set was definitely not as close as the scoreboard suggested. 25-17, Alex Chinnery's side came back, but couldn't close it out as Darkstar won set 4, 22-25, and a big win for Durham on the road, Jess, against a very tough Essex team.
Yeah, it's we said that there was a lot of potential in this Durham team when we were talking about them when it came to opening weekend. We know that they obviously have a really deep bench. They have loads of players to select from. They've been playing in the Bucks League, but they've not had too many Super League matches of late. So to see them come out this strong against Essex, who, I'm sure Alex Chenery said something along the lines of he was expecting them to be really top this season. So I think this is going to be massive. Durham has come out and made a statement on their debut for this particular Super League Live.
Yeah, it definitely was. And they did it by committee. Izzy Decker, 15 kills. Ali Ruffin, 12 kills. Chloe Thomas, 13 from the opposite positions. All 3 pin hitters doing a really good job. And they kept a couple of the Essex big hitters quiet as well. Leah Borek ended up with 11 kills. And Elena Dupre, 16 kills, but 11 errors on 41 swings for the Essex outside. And then Durham backed that up, Jess. Why beat one top team when you can beat two? They went up to Ernest Bevan on the Sunday and beat the Mallory Eagles 3-1. Similar score to the Saturday. Edging the first set 23-25. Mallory fought back 25-20, but then Durham ground out sets 3 in set 4, playing almost flawless volleyball 18-25, 16-25 to complete the 3-1 win. And Durham just making 30 errors across the 4 sets. A huge factor in that win. And if one win wasn't enough for the Durham Platinets, they then went and backed it up on Sunday against the Mallory Eagles at Ernest Bevan. Durham winning a very tight first set, 23-25. Mallory bouncing back to take set 2, 25-20, but then Durham 18-25, 16-25 to take a perfect 6 points out of 6 on the road trip. And they did it through really consistent volleyball. This Durham team just made 30 errors across the 4 sets against Mallory, passed over a 2-2 as well. And Jess, a really impressive all-around performance, especially considering the Saturday game as well.
Yeah, definitely. And, they had the same players for both matches. I've had a look at the team sheets as well. So they'll be really pleased with those 6 points that they took away this weekend. And, we talked about the potential that this team had when we were doing our opening weekend preview podcast. We were maybe a little disappointed in what we saw on opening weekend because we thought that they're obviously better than what they played like on that first week. But it's opening weekend, it's early in the season. But this weekend is exactly what we expected to see from them from the get-go. Massively dominant performance. You mentioned that they got maximum points from this weekend. They'll be pleased to know that they're, top of the table right now. And as well, I think they have a game in hand, which is really good going. And it wasn't just that they won and got 6 points against 2, mid-table teams. They came out and beat Essex and Mallory, who have been top of the table since the start of the season. So that is really a statement. And I know that Ross Enfield and Paul Welsh will both be really pleased with that performance, and they'll be looking forward to, that continued, hopefully they'll be looking to dominate from now to the end of the season. And they've got the depth of squad to do that, even if they have, a couple of injuries or whatever, hopefully they don't, but they have so much depth and potential that they could just absolutely smash through everybody else for the rest of the season. So we'll just have to see what happens, but really exciting stuff.
Yeah, and it was the right sides for Durham doing all the damage. Chloe Thomas, 19 kills, 3 errors on 44 swings for a 365 hitting percentage. And then Raylene Jones off the bench when Durham went to the double sub, which was massively effective. 5 kills on 6 swings. And Elena Bullamo came in that game to set as well on that double sub. 9 assists on just 17 attempts. And Niara Hightower through the middle, 7 blocks in the end for her, as Mallory only really had Chloe Allen going on the offensive end. 20 kills for Chloe, but no one else from Mallory having more than 7. The other game on Sunday morning, as it was London Lionhearts against Leeds. And again, Leeds struggling to find success. A 3-0 victory for London Lionhearts, 25-13, 25-19, 25-18. And really, it was the serve reception that let Leeds down. They couldn't find any consistent passing, and that led to a scramble on offense. But Lionhearts took full advantage and did what they needed to do, Jess, to continue trying to get some momentum.
Yeah, I mean, really big 3 points for London Lionhearts here. I won't say that they're desperate for it, but it's a tight table. It's really going to be difficult. We couldn't say right now who's going to be 4th through 8th of the table between now and the end of the season. But I will say, you said that Leeds was struggling, but I'm going to say that this is a really positive thing for them, because to get to 18 and 19 points against London Lionhearts, that despite the fact that they struggled with service reception, is really impressive. They're very good out of system. They're always swinging aggressively, even if it is an out of system set. So it's that level of aggression, and the fact that they've been playing with each other for so long and they have such a good team chemistry, that gives me a lot of heart to see, what can they do this season. They don't currently have any points on the board, But this makes me think that, a point or two is coming in the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, it was 5 aces for Elena Vislien, and then Masha Shrivadova leading the way with 12 kills on 25 swings. And then the final game of the weekend, and boy, did this one deliver up in the Northeast as Newcastle hosted side out, completing that back-to-back. And this one went all the way to the end, plus a few extra bonus points as well. Newcastle winning set one convincingly, 25-16. Side out 23-25 set two before Newcastle reversed that score for a 2-1 lead. But side out one sets four and sets five, 19-25, and then 16-18 to close it out and take 5 points from their weekend on the road. And Jess, this is a game that delivered in every aspect.
Yeah, an incredible performance from both of these teams. It had everything you could possibly have wanted. I know that Polonia are going to be massively pleased with themselves for taking away 2 points from this match, but I think even more so Newcastle are going to be pleased with themselves for taking a point off of Polonia, because that's a feat. And not only to take a point off of them, but to say that they took them 18-16 in the fifth set. That's a long fifth set. So, it might be that Polonia were slightly weaker than they normally would be because they had played a match on the Saturday, but you've got to take your advantages wherever they come. So huge, huge stuff. But, there were a couple of standout performances as well on the Polonia side, and I know you're about to get into some of that, but it's just how much can an individual performance take a team through the season versus taking them through one single match.
Yeah, but I think my takeaway is how tight these two sides were statistically. There was a 0.001 hitting percentage difference. There was a 0.01 serve receive reception. There was one ace difference. There was the 2 dig difference, a 1 block difference. Like, these two sides were just so evenly matched. And it was in the end for Newcastle, the middle, Renee Kilgo, who obviously missed opening weekend, had a big game against Leeds, had 14 kills on 27 swings through the middle. And just 2 errors. And as well, she had, I think it was 5 blocks in the end for Renee, and Jenna Vask with 20 kills on 44 swings. But for team side out, it was Alexis Diaz and Fonte leading way with one of the best games we're going to see all season. 29 kills, 3 errors on 54 swings. She also passed 4 balls from the opposite position. And then had 5 blocks and 8 digs. She helped get her side through. And Jess, it was interesting because obviously Alexis has had to fill in a lot through the middle in the opening couple of games, back in her probably slightly preferred opposite position, and she came through in such a big way.
Yeah, I mean, we saw it with her last season. Obviously, she picked up Rebels a couple of times when they really needed it, but she's one of those players that can really light a fire under a team, and it's that type of leadership that some teams really, they don't have that one fiery player, and it's, a strength at times, and it can be a weakness because if your fiery player is not firing on that day, it can, make your team struggle. But when Alexis is on fire, she's really getting the whole team ramped up. You can see that, like, their defense gets better, everybody's more positive, there's more communication, and it impacts every aspect of the game.
Yeah. And obviously that wraps up the game. So very quick look through the league table. It's technically a 3-way tie on 8 points apiece for Durham, Mallory, and team side out. But Durham, as Jess said, have that game in hand, having only played 3 games. Essex Rebels slipped to a 2-1 record, but has got 6 points for 2 victories, with getting 3 in each. And then Lionhearts, Newcastle, and Darkstar all on 4 points apiece. Darkstar having played 4 games, Newcastle and Lionhearts 3 games apiece. And then Lead Score still looking to pick up their first set of the season. So Jess, as we're kind of a month in now, what's your biggest takeaway in the Mari Women's Super League?
It feels like the top 4 could be fairly static from here on out. However, the fact that Lionhearts and Newcastle only have 3 games played so far, so they have a game in hand against Mallory and Polonia, could shake things up a bit. because that gives them a little bit more time before they play those additional games. And if they can pick more points up as the season goes on, it could completely change things. But I think once you get below 4th place, everything else could completely change from what it is now. Like, if we tried to predict who's going to be in that 6th, 7th place playoff match at the end of the season, I can almost guarantee we would get it wrong because you just don't know. So, there's a couple of teams in the mix that 1 or 2 big injuries might change their performance. And there's a couple of teams in the mix where if they can tweak 1 or 2 things, maybe it's service reception, maybe it's their setting or their style, they can get a lot more points as the season wears on. So it's anybody's table at this point, and I can't wait until Final Fours already. I'm really interested to see who makes it, what's it going to look like, what are the matches going to look like, how much insanity is going to go on.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I think it's too early to say top 4 set. You forget that Lionhearts took side out to 5 sets on opening weekend. Obviously, Newcastle seemed to have started to find some rhythm. Obviously, that opening weekend wasn't great, but convincing win against Leeds, now pushing a side out team all the way. Obviously, we all talked about, especially last week, we talked about Dark Star. So I think there's some interesting bits in there. But for me, I've got to go with what I saw this weekend in person, and that is the form of the Durham Platinets. As you maybe alluded to, wasn't the best on opening weekend, an early start, and they dropped the first 2 sets. But since then, it's been almost perfect. 9 sets won, 2 dropped against 2 of potentially the top 4 teams in Mallory and Essex. That all coming on the road.
Mm-hmm.
And how good they looked as a unit this weekend. They got production from 9-10 players deep. The double sub that Paul Welsh was working really worked. And I think the consistency that they'll have, that they can find ways to score throughout the court, whether it's through the defense and the block, especially from the middles. Ellie Schrader was impressive on Saturday. They've obviously got options on both pins that are consistent as well. And then I think Setting and Libero, they can make changes when they needed to. Jenna Giombi got hurt on Sunday against Mallory and didn't look like anything missed the beat. In terms of what came in off the bench. So I think that's really interesting. That Durham depth, I think, is the most impressive thing. And right now, I think they're probably the favourites for the title.
Yeah, I mean, certainly favorites to finish top of the table going into Final Four weekend. Anything can happen in that Final Four weekend, so we'll have to wait and see. But I don't disagree with you. I'm really interested to see, though, when they play each other again, Durham and Mallory, because I almost wonder, did Mallory take what happened at opening weekend for Durham and just assumed that that's how they were going to play? That's the tape they watched, that's what they prepared for, and that's not what they got.
Yeah, I think some of it. I think Mallory were disappointed with the error count as well. 46 errors for that Mallory team's probably very unlike Mallory. Obviously, there's no Jojo Cruz, but that's not taken away from what Durham did. I thought Durham was superb both days, and that contribution throughout is going to be really interesting. So yeah, it's difficult, but I do say my takeaway was, I think any team on any day, if you get to a Final Four, could potentially beat anyone.
Yeah.
But again, there's a lot more matchups. And I know Durham next time out, they've got this weekend off, but they come back down south in 12 days' time. They played both Lionhearts and Side Out on another double header. So that's really, really testing. But if they get through that, you talk about your 4 southern trips are done for the season. You don't travel outside of the cup. Obviously, they've got to go to Bemi in the last 16 of the cup. So that's a bit of a road trip. But you've done the hard part of your schedule.
Yeah.
So if they come through that and go 5-0, they're going to be in a really strong spot.
Yes, definitely.
So over on to the men's Super League table, Mallory Eagles, as Jess alluded to, 4 games, 4 wins, but only 10 points on the board, having gone the distance early on. And then London Giants, having bounced back from an opening weekend loss, now sit in second place at 9 points on a 3-1 record. Essex Rebels also 3-1, 8 points. The University of Nottingham 2-3 on 8 points, and then a bit of a gap to Newcastle. But Newcastle have only played those 2 fixtures on 4 points. Richmond on 3 points, Durham on 2, and Leeds on 1, having picked up that point at Richmond. So Jess, your big picture takeaway from the first month on the men's side is?
The men's side, I mean, obviously the table's a lot tighter, well, I say it's a lot tighter. There's an actual point spread, unlike the women's, but it feels like things are closer together in a lot of ways. And, partially because Newcastle have only played 2 matches, so it's really difficult to compare them to the rest of the table. But also, you've got things like Nottingham dropped, they were first last week, I think. Yes, they were first last week. They dropped down to 4th place in the table. They've got 5 games played, so they've played one more than everybody else pretty much. But they've had such a hard, they've played all of the top teams in their opening matches. So they've played London Giants twice, and they beat them the first time. They've played Essex Rebels and taken a point off of them. They've played Mallory Eagles and taken a point off of them. And then
Neither of
they
those
took all
games,
3.
they were under strength in both those games too because they
Yeah,
rotated.
exactly. So it's they had a bit of a shocker in the 4th set of their match this weekend. A bit of a wobble. It happens to almost every single team. But, that tough run in, now when they go in and play, every team is going to be tough. But when they go in and play, the lower table teams, are things going to be different? Are they going to use that to their advantage and say, right, we've got, a time here to really solidify the position. Don't drop any sets. Don't drop any points. So I think that's going to be a big one. But I think my biggest question at the moment is around Durham men. So we saw Sean McQuiggan was there this weekend, made an impact. How much of an impact is he going to make now that he's back?
Well, he was there. He didn't play on Sunday,
Well, yes.
but he was on the bench, which was a good sign.
Yes. He's more back than he was at opening weekend. And then, so how much of an impact is he going to have? And is it right to be relying on one player to make a difference to your team? Or do you need to be doing something slightly different to what you have been doing to say, right, we need to pull things together. We're currently 7th in the table, which doesn't mean a lot this early in the season. They've got a lot of away games in this first half of the season. They have loads of home games early on in the spring half. So in those 7 games that they've got from January till the end of the season, if they won every single one of them, would that be enough? Or are they going to drop too many points in the first half of the season to get themselves into a good position? So it's just they've had some tough matches as well, but are they performing at the level that they feel like they should be, I guess, is what I'm asking.
Yeah, I mean, I spoke to Ross Enfield in the build-up for the comms on Saturday, and I think he was talking about this being a building stage still. He was more focused on performance, and I think in spells he got that on in both games. I think there's elements of both tapes when I've kind of looked over stuff, obviously seen bits live as well on Saturday, that he'll be really pleased with. I just think it's the inconsistency right now. And I think, I'll be honest, like setting up and down, obviously Joe Colbert is stepping in and learning in a full-time role, but like that's a big moment. He had 2 or 3 little hiccups, and that can just kill momentum of a team. It can potentially deflate some stuff, but they also bounced back through. They pushed Mallory on Sunday in multiple moments, but I think the next month, they've got a couple of weeks again off, but they're their fixtures the rest of this year. They go to Richmond and go to Giants on a doubleheader. They then host Leeds 2 days later on a Tuesday night. And then they back that week up and go to Nottingham. So that's a 4-game spell before Christmas. If Sean McQuiggan's not back, or he's back on a limited basis, you're all of a sudden through a lot of your season, half your season. And if you're still, let's say you lose to Richmond, worst case scenario, you're on maybe 4 points at Christmas out of 7. That's half your league gone. It's asking a lot in the second half of the season, as you kind of referred to. Yeah. But if they can pick up a couple of wins, if they can beat Leeds, they can beat Richmond, all of a sudden you're back in with a shot of Final Four.
Yeah.
So I think this that spell, that week they have, is going to basically make or break their season. And the fact that is before Christmas, I think is really interesting.
Yeah. It's going to be a tough time. And it's a lot of matches in a very short, 7-day period. It's a lot to ask of any team.
Yeah,
And
obviously they are
especially you've
used
got,
to it with the university side, obviously playing
yeah,
midweek. So difference between them and a Tuesday and a Wednesday probably not a lot. And I think your Nottingham point is super interesting because you say they played a lot of the top sides, and you're right, assuming we think we know who the top sides are.
yeah,
But
that is
do
true.
we know? Because if Durham break through, if Newcastle break through having only played 2 games, you've got to play them 4 times. So
Yeah.
actually, if Essex or Mallory don't make top 4, you've dropped points against non-top 4 teams. So I think the depth of the Super League, and with how well Leeds men, they've not quite, obviously they've got a point against Richmond, but they're starting to progress, especially if they can get Nelson back and he doesn't miss too much time. If they can maybe find one more piece to add to the squad. But we know people like Emmanuel Otoye, Max Mikowski, Josh Crosser are going to get better throughout the
Yeah.
season and that experience. Richmond are starting to get there, but there's some alarming signs. If Artemi doesn't play great, can they compete? But they've taken sets off teams that the depth of this Super League, that pretty much anyone can beat anyone. And I think there's not a lot outside of maybe London Giants running away with it, that anything is possible. And I think that there's going to be some big twists and turns every step of the road. And you could almost look at any result on any game and go, okay, that does surprise me, but I'm not stunned by it. And I think the depth of the Super League is my big takeaway from that first month.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. And I think that's kind of where I was going when I first started off. And I said it feels quite tight in the men's table, even though it doesn't look tight points wise, because they all feel like they're of a very similar level. And that's not to say that the women doesn't feel the same way, but it's just, it feels even tighter in the men's league at the moment
Yeah.
anyway. But it's still early days. It's only been a month. You're right. We're still early on.
Yeah, it is, and I say a lot can change. A lot changed from opening weekend to what we've seen in the last couple of weeks as well. So I think it's very interesting. I know we did put out on socials a question. I think the only question we got was about, are Durham men potentially relegation candidates, and I think we kind of touched upon it. But I think the thing is, if you end up in that 6-7 game, anyone is a relegation candidate because it's a one-off game, and you're one injury away, you're one illness away on that game day. You're ultimately just one off day away, because whoever is 6th and 7th, they are going to be more than capable of beating each other. So I think you could say, are Durham men relegation candidates? Yes. But I'd like to say who aren't relegation candidates in the men's Super League outside of probably London Giants.
You got to say Mallory Eagles at the moment, because I mean they're 4-0. Are you going to tell me that they're now going to go on a massive losing run?
Not necessarily, but there's just some signs at the weekend. There's some inconsistency there. They've not got a lot of consistency on the outside. Like Sam Ashita stepped up this weekend, but they don't have a second big arm. If Ben Kwame has a bad day, and Ben can, he'll be the first to say that. And we saw that opening weekend. Then there's a lot of pressure on Nathan Fullerton. If Zach Omashemi is going to stay around, we don't know. They've not really found consistency through the middle yet. Logan and Olafs have had good games, but I don't see Mallory setting the middle out of system a lot, or even in system as much as maybe they should.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I see questions. They have 2 of their 4 wins are in 5 sets. So if you take 2 points away from that, how different is a 2-2 record sitting at 8 points?
Yeah, fair enough. So you're right though, because anything can happen between now and the end of the season. It's ridiculously tight.
So as we start to wrap up, what's the one thing that you're looking to between now and Christmas? We've got a bit of a break this week with just 2 games Mallory leads, but what are you looking at the most between now and Christmas that you think will set the narrative for the second half of the season?
I think it's going to be which teams in the next couple of weeks can get themselves settled. So we've started to see some teams get themselves into more of a rhythm than they were in opening weekend. Obviously Durham women is the biggest turnaround that we've seen, but they're now performing at the level that we thought they were going to come out at. So they've settled themselves. are other teams going to take that next step up and push themselves to that same level? Or are we going to start to see a divide? Because I think over the next couple of weeks, especially in the lead up to Christmas, you're going to see some teams are going to take it. This is going to come out so wrong and somebody's going to come at me, but some teams are going to take it more seriously, and some teams are going to start to take their foot off the gas because it's the lead up to Christmas, and you're thinking about family and breaks and doing all of that stuff. So, are we going to start to see a gap forming in either of the league tables between now and Christmas because of that? Or are we going to see teams say, right, there's only so many games in the season, we have to get it together and take every point home that we can?
Yeah, and obviously it always wraps, especially with so many teams playing Bucks or so many athletes playing Bucks, that once that Buck season wraps up, which is a week or two away for Christmas, it does then start to very quickly kind of transpire. I think for me, the big story is actually, when I look at fixtures, is Dark Star women, and can they be that team that doesn't get involved in a relegation battle, because their fixtures coming up are super, super interesting. They go in a couple of weeks up to Newcastle in what potentially be a big game, and then they finish with Mallory and Essex on the road on a double header. So if you try and talk about trying to break through a little bit, like that Newcastle game for both those teams becomes super important, and even probably for Newcastle as well. That's that only game before Christmas, and you think if one of those teams can 3-0, 3-1 in that game, that will set them up to potentially break into that top four that potentially we may have with Mallory side out, Essex and Durham. But I think Dark Star that team, because with only that one safe spot in 5th place, I think for them, they've had that kind of upslope, but can they now contain that with a break, 2 tricky games before Christmas? Or are they going to be that team that kind of drops? Newcastle suddenly pick up and challenge with Lionhearts for that top 4, and Dark Star become that kind of team that they did last year, that you kind of just feel like they're potentially heading for that relegation playoff.
Yeah, I mean, potentially they've had a fairly big start to their season as well. Pelodia, Durham, Essex. So yeah, adding 2 additional tough matches into that mix is just gonna, I don't know, they're either gonna be forged by fire here, or they're gonna start to show some cracks.
Yeah, and I will also plug very early that the Super League Live doubleheader to end and basically wrap up the first half of the year, Lionhearts side out and Mallory London Giants, could be highly entertaining. The schedule makers have done a really good job with that doubleheader, and that will be a fun one to broadcast just before the Christmas break. But as we said, Jess, just 2 games next weekend. Obviously, a rematch of both games we saw this week at Ep.7 as Leeds host Mallory. Is there any way Leeds can take a point in either of those games?
I think it's unlikely. More likely in the men's side, considering the way that they've pushed them already. But it still feels relatively unlikely that they're going to do that. What I would say is, based on the performances this week for the ladies, they have a good chance to try something, to try to push them, aiming for like getting 20 points against Mallory is going to be big for them. And it's those types of victories, because they are in that kind of like building phase, because they're still learning, they're still young. It's those types of victories they need to focus on, rather than, have I won a set? Have I done this? It's, what's my service reception percentage? How many assists do I have in a match? Have I pushed myself to get, 18, 20 points against one of the top 2-3 teams in the table right now? So I think they will continue to learn and grow, but I think they're unlikely to take a point this weekend.
Yeah, I think if Nelson is missing, I think for the men it's an uphill battle, and it'll be interesting for the women. I think, yeah, you're right. They're not quite ready to take on Mallory, but what can they learn from playing them back-to-back weeks? This is a group that learns well. Potentially Leeds may try, and we don't know what the story with Perfection Uwagbo is and why she's not been in the lineup. But again, you add her, that's a different weapon. But bearing in mind, no one on that Leeds team had more than 4 kills against Mallory on Saturday for the women. I think it is going to be a tough ask. And that will about do it for episode number 7 of the Time Out podcast. Next week, we're not quite sure. We may have a very special guest coming on, as there is a very big event next week in Crystal Palace. King and Queen of the Court is coming on Friday and Saturday. And if you don't know about that, head to Volleyball England website, head to the King and Queen of the Court and get your tickets. It's going to be 2 tremendous nights. Obviously, the Beach World Championships currently going on. Big shout out to the Bayo brothers for making it through the pool phase. Obviously fell a little bit short today, but for the first time to have an English team in the World Championships pulling off a victory and getting into that round was a big deal. And we will see them in Crystal Palace back at home in just 10 days' time. But from Jess Smith and myself, my customers, thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
You've been listening to the Super League Timeout Podcast, hosted by Michael Hansen Morris and Jess Smith.